Marlon Brando remains a paradox in Hollywood history. A man celebrated as one of the greatest actors of all time, yet equally infamous for his chaotic, selfish, and at times deeply disturbing off-screen behavior. On paper, his legacy is nearly untouchable. 2 Academy Awards, roles in masterpieces like On the Waterfront, The Godfather, and Apocalypse Now, and a revolutionary impact on acting itself. He brought Stanislavski-inspired naturalism into an industry once dominated by stiff, theatrical performances, changing the very DNA of modern cinema. His portrayals of Stanley Kowalski, Vito Corleone, and Colonel Kurtz are forever etched into cultural memory. Yet for all this brilliance, Brando's reputation was also poisoned by his refusal to follow basic professional standards, his erratic antics on set, and his disturbing personal controversies. He famously refused to memorize scripts, instead relying on cue cards strapped to co-stars or even written on props like diapers and walls. Directors and fellow actors were often driven to despair as Brando derailed productions with laziness, bizarre demands, and cruel pranks. He nearly ruined films like Mutiny on the Bounty and The Island of Dr. Moreau with his egotistical behavior, forcing endless rewrites, delaying shoots, and pushing costs to the brink of collapse. His brilliance, more often than not, came tangled in dysfunction. Beyond the antics, Brando's personal life was even more troubling. While not convicted of serious crimes himself, he has been linked to disturbing controversies that cast shadows on his reputation. Most infamously, in Last Tango in Paris, 1972, actress Maria Schneider later revealed that Brando and director Bernardo Bertolucci conspired to use an unplanned, non-consensual butter scene without warning her, an act she described as leaving her feeling humiliated and raped. Brando admitted they intentionally withheld details to provoke a real reaction, an action widely condemned as sexual assault disguised as filmmaking. His family life was also marred by tragedy and violence. His son, Christian Brando, was convicted of manslaughter in the killing of Dag Drolet, the boyfriend of Brando's daughter Cheyenne, while Cheyenne herself later took her own life. Marlon publicly defended Christian in court, but the scandal cemented the Brando household as a place of dysfunction, trauma, and violence. In the end, Brando's legacy is torn between revolutionary artistry and reckless cruelty. He may be remembered as one of the most important actors in film history, but his refusal to care about his craft, his willingness to exploit others for authenticity, and the darkness surrounding his personal life ensure that his greatness can never be celebrated without also acknowledging the destruction he left in his wake. Marlon Brando's beginnings were as turbulent as the career that followed. Born in Omaha, Nebraska in 1924, he grew up in a fractured household marked by alcoholism and emotional neglect, circumstances that shaped his rebellious streak from an early age. School proved to be a hostile environment for him. He was expelled multiple times for disruptive behavior and chronic defiance, with only drama and sports providing an outlet where he excelled. His father, frustrated with his lack of discipline, sent him to a military academy, but Brando's contempt for authority led to further expulsions. Ultimately, he abandoned conventional schooling altogether and followed his sisters to New York, where he discovered the stage and, for the first time, the validation he long craved. Studying under Stella Adler, Brando immersed himself in the Stanislavski system of realism, which demanded not mechanical recitation, but an emotional embodiment of character. Adler's teaching ignited his talent, steering him away from shallow theatrics toward a form of performance that was alive, spontaneous, and deeply human. That raw approach quickly made Brando a standout on Broadway, culminating in his electrifying turn as Stanley Kowalski in A Streetcar Named Desire, 1947 stage, 1951 film. The performance revolutionized American acting, introducing a visceral, naturalistic style that left critics and audiences stunned. Years later, he delivered another landmark in On the Waterfront, 1954, winning an Academy Award for a portrayal that remains one of cinema's most iconic. His method felt unpredictable, unscripted, and real, but it came at a price. Even in these early triumphs, Brando's rebelliousness was evident. He refused to properly memorize lines, relied on cue cards to keep dialogue fresh, and delighted in pranks that irritated colleagues. This duality, genius fused with defiance, would define his rise and foreshadow the chaos to come. By the 1960s, the brilliance that had once defined Marlon Brando began to collapse under the weight of his own ego and unpredictability. His lone directorial project, One-Eyed Jacks, 1961, was plagued by indecision and obsessive perfectionism. He reportedly delayed scenes for hours just to capture the right wave hitting the shore. The production ballooned far over budget and schedule, leaving studios wary of working with him. The fiasco was followed by Mutiny on the Bounty, 1962, where Brando's reputation deteriorated even further. On set in Tahiti, he quarreled endlessly with crew members, delayed shoots, and at times simply refused to act if circumstances didn't suit him. Costs spiraled out of control, the film bombed financially, and Brando became branded as a liability. His standing in Hollywood plunged, and desperate for income, he signed multi-picture deals that prioritized paychecks over quality, resulting in a string of forgettable flops that almost erased him from serious consideration as a leading man. Yet in the early 1970s, Brando stunned the industry with a spectacular resurgence. Paramount executives initially resisted casting him as Vito Corleone in The Godfather, 1972, given his track record of chaos and box office failures. But after a screen test and strict contractual conditions, reduced pay, financial accountability for delays, and good behavior on set, Brando was given the role. What followed was one of cinema's most legendary performances, immortalizing him as the patriarch of the Corleone family. He won his second Oscar for the role, but refused to accept it, sending activist Sacheen Littlefeather to decline the award on his behalf in protest of Hollywood's treatment of Native Americans. That same year, he took on Last Tango in Paris, a daring but disturbing film that courted scandal, particularly due to its notorious butter scene, which actress Maria Schneider later revealed was sprung on her without consent. Despite controversy, critics hailed Brando's performance, cementing his comeback. From near exile to reborn legend, Brando had proven he could still dominate the screen, but the volatility that defined him was far from over. After the towering success of The Godfather and Last Tango in Paris, Marlon Brando slipped back into old habits, quickly reminding Hollywood why working with him was often a nightmare. By the mid-1970s, his unprofessionalism was reaching legendary status. On the set of The Missouri Breaks, 1976, he baffled director Arthur Penn by improvising entire scenes, randomly adopting odd accents, and dressing his outlaw character in aristocratic costumes that had no connection to the role. Critics savaged the performance, calling it sloppy and indulgent, a sign that Brando had once again stopped taking his craft seriously. Then came Superman, 1978, where Brando's behavior bordered on parody. Cast as Jor-El, Superman's father, he earned an astronomical $3.7 million up front, plus nearly 12% of the film's profits, for less than 15 minutes of screen time. Not only did he refuse to learn his lines, he demanded they be written on props, including the infant Superman's diaper. At one point, he even proposed that Jor-El should be portrayed as a talking bagel, arguing that nobody knew what Kryptonians looked like. Director Richard Donner pushed back, but Brando's outrageous suggestions, pranks, and refusal to prepare highlighted just how detached he had become, even as he collected one of the largest paydays in Hollywood history. His return to serious drama in Francis Ford Coppola's Apocalypse Now, 1979, only deepened the chaos. Hired to play Colonel Kurtz, Brando showed up overweight, having ignored promises to slim down, and completely unprepared. He hadn't even read Heart of Darkness, the novel that inspired the film. Coppola was forced to rewrite entire sequences and shoot him in deep shadows to hide his physical state. Days were lost as Coppola and Brando debated the character endlessly, inflating costs on what was already one of cinema's most infamous productions. And yet, in spite of the delays and dysfunction, Brando's final performance was mesmerizing, his whispered monologues and ominous presence cementing Kurtz as an icon of cinematic madness. It was the perfect encapsulation of Brando's career: brilliance born from chaos, genius inseparable from self-destruction. In the final decades of his life, Marlon Brando drifted between flashes of brilliance and depths of self-destruction, a pattern that ultimately left his once untouchable legacy scarred by scandal, eccentricity, and even allegations of violence and criminality. By the 1980s, his reputation had collapsed to the point where studios only hired him for his name value, not his professionalism. Occasionally, Brando reminded audiences of his raw power, as with his supporting role in A Dry White Season, 1989, where he accepted a fraction of his usual fee out of solidarity with the film's anti-apartheid message, earning him his final Oscar nomination. In The Freshman, 1990, he cleverly parodied his iconic role as Vito Corleone, delighting critics who felt a glimpse of the old genius remained. But these high points were exceptions in a period dominated by humiliating lows. On the island of Dr. Moreau, 1996, Brando's behavior was almost unhinged. He refused direction, feuded with cast and crew, and spent most of his time secluded in an air-conditioned trailer while the production collapsed around him. He demanded to wear an ice bucket as a crown and insisted his character be revealed as a dolphin in the film's final scene. His use of earpieces instead of memorizing lines led to bizarre interruptions, such as repeating police radio chatter mid-scene. Actors and crew recalled him as detached, hostile, and disruptive, often forcing entire shooting days to be wasted. On The Score, 2001, his final film, he openly mocked director Frank Oz, refusing to take direction and derisively calling him Miss Piggy. Co-stars Robert De Niro and Edward Norton were forced to mediate, and Brando frequently refused to wear proper costumes, sometimes filming key scenes in his underwear. By this point, Brando admitted he no longer cared about acting. He argued that memorizing lines was unnatural, likening it to reciting nursery rhymes, and insisted that spontaneity gave his performances authenticity. But behind that defense lay a deeper truth. By the 1960s, and even more so in the 1990s, he had lost his passion for the craft entirely. Acting had become little more than a paycheck, a way to fund his expensive lifestyle, sprawling family, and political causes. His personal life unraveled into chaos. He fathered at least 11 children with multiple women, maintained volatile relationships, and found himself dragged into violent scandals. Most infamously, in 1990, Brando's son Christian shot and killed Doug Drolet, the boyfriend of Brando's daughter Cheyenne, inside the family's Beverly Hills compound. Brando publicly pleaded for leniency in court, and Christian was convicted of manslaughter, but the incident cemented the Brando household as a nexus of dysfunction, crime, and tragedy. Cheyenne, traumatized by the killing and her father's neglect, later took her own life. Added to this was Brando's complicity in Last Tango in Paris, 1972, where he admitted to conspiring with director Bernardo Bertolucci to spring a sexual assault scene on actress Maria Schneider without her consent. An act Schneider described as leaving her raped on camera. By the time Brando died in 2004, aged 80, of respiratory failure, his legacy was a bitter contradiction. He had changed acting forever, inspiring generations of performers to embrace realism and emotional vulnerability. Yet he also exemplified the dangers of unchecked ego, abuse of power, and moral collapse. The mischievous humor that stayed with him until the end could not erase the destruction he left behind. Careers disrupted, productions derailed, lives in his family torn apart, and victims of his actions who never fully recovered. Today, Brando is remembered not only as a genius, but as a cautionary tale. A man who revolutionized cinema while simultaneously tarnishing his legacy through violent scandals and grotesque misuse of his talent.